Anwulika, worn out from the pregnancy and trying to stay hopeful, began to notice their finances getting tighter, but she couldn't piece together what was wrong. Each time she asked, Chidi would find a new excuse or reassure her that things would turn around soon. But the fabric, the money, and her faith in him were slipping through her fingers, even as her belly grew and her strength waned. One evening, as she lay awake, feeling the baby's soft movements, a sense of dread settled over her. She thought back on all the strange excuses, the missing fabrics, the sympathetic looks from customers who'd seen her once bustling shop slowly empty out. A small, fearful voice in her mind began to wonder if this life, the one she thought would free her from her loneliness and the God's curse, was not the blessing she'd hoped for, but just another kind of trap. As the months wore on, Anwulika's suspicions grew, and in time, she would learn the full extent of Chidi's betrayal, how even the small semblance of stability she tried to build was being eroded, not by the gods, but by the very person she had trusted with her life and future. At 6 months pregnant, Anwulika's days had become a haze of exhaustion. She rarely left her home, relying on Chidi's updates to stay connected to the outside world. When Mama Chisom, a kind neighbor from the market, came by to check on her, Anwulika welcomed her visit with open arms. Mama Chisom, with her gentle eyes and steady voice, sat beside her, expressing concern. She spoke about the upcoming New Yam Festival, suggesting Anwulika prepare her shop for the busy season. "Let me keep an eye on Nkechi for you," she offered. "With a baby on the way, you need your strength." Anwulika smiled, grateful for Mama Chisom's kindness. "Thank you, Mama Chisom. You've been like a mother to me since my own mother passed away. But I wouldn't want to burden you with my shop, especially with the festival coming up. You'll be just as busy with your own customers. Besides, Chidi has been looking after my sales, and I still have plenty of colorful fabric stocked up." Mama Chisom's face softened with pity, and she placed a hand on Anwulika's shoulder. "My dear," she said quietly, "I know this pregnancy has kept you indoors, but I don't think you realize your shop is almost empty. Nkechi has sold off nearly everything you had in there. You'll need to restock if you want your customers to keep coming back." Anwulika's heart raced, and she shook her head in disbelief. "No, that can't be. Chidi would have told me. He's been handling everything." Mama Chisom sighed deeply. "I know you trust him, but I've seen your shop, Anwulika. I think it would be best if you see it for yourself. But please, don't tell Chidi you're going. Just go and look." Anwulika managed a dry laugh. "Chidi wouldn't want me to leave the house anyway. He's so careful with me, always saying I need to rest and stay healthy for our baby." But that night, Anwulika lay awake, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. She tried to push Mama Chisom's words from her mind, telling herself it was just a misunderstanding. But a growing sense of dread told her she couldn't ignore it. She had to see for herself. The next morning, she dressed quietly and made her way to the market without a word to Chidi. As she approached her stall, her heart dropped. The shelves, once packed with vibrant rolls of fabric, were nearly bare. What few pieces remained were pushed to the edges, arranged to make it look fuller than it was. The shop she'd built so carefully over the years looked hollow, like a shell of what it once had been. Nkechi, the sales rep, looked up in surprise when she saw Anwulika. She stammered a greeting, but Anwulika could see the guilt in her eyes. Pieces of the puzzle began falling into place, and the truth hit her like a blow. Chidi, the man she had trusted to watch over her life's work, had been selling her goods to feed his gambling habits, deceiving her at every turn. Anwulika felt her world shatter. She'd endured hardship, loneliness, and the curse of the gods. But this was different. This betrayal came from the person she thought was her safe harbor. She stood in the emptiness of her once thriving stall, realizing that the love she had hoped would lift the curse had only deepened her suffering. As she made her way back home, a heaviness settled over her. She knew now that Chidi's presence in her life was not the answer to her prayers, but perhaps just another consequence of the curse she bore. For Anwulika, the dreams of family, love and happiness slipped further away, leaving her once again in the shadow of betrayal. That night, Chidi came home reeking of palm wine, his eyes bloodshot, his face twisted with anger. He knew Anwulika had gone to the store. Nkechi had already told him. She demanded answers, her voice breaking with hurt and betrayal. "What have you done, Chidi?" she cried. "You've taken everything I worked for and turned it into a lie. Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Chidi's anger flared. "Truth? What truth, Anwulika? All you ever cared about was that shop. You think I don't see it? You think you're better than me because of a few rolls of fabric?" Their voices rose, echoing through the small house as they hurled accusations at each other. Anwulika's anger was fueled by months of betrayal, and Chidi's guilt twisted into rage. In a fit of anger, he pushed her hard, and she stumbled backward. She fell to the ground with a sharp cry, and within seconds, blood began to spread across the floor beneath her. Chidi's face drained of color. He watched in horror as Anwulika lay there, bleeding, her eyes wide with shock and pain. In an instant, his drunken anger evaporated, replaced by a cold sobriety. Panicking, he called for help and, with the assistance of neighbors who'd come running, rushed her to the hospital. When they arrived, he handed her over to the nurses and doctors, watching helplessly as they wheeled her into an emergency room. He stayed just long enough to see her disappear behind the doors, then slipped away, his guilt gnawing at him. He went back home, collected a few belongings, and left, leaving Anwulika alone in the hospital. The next morning, Anwulika woke up groggy and disoriented. She was surrounded by the sterile white walls of a hospital room, and the ache in her body was overwhelming. A nurse entered, her face gentle but solemn. Anwulika struggled to speak, her mind swimming with confusion and fear. "Your baby," the nurse began softly. "We had to perform an emergency cesarean section. I'm so sorry, Anwulika. The baby didn't survive." The words hit Anwulika like a punch to the gut. She lay there, numb, the weight of her loss settling over her like a crushing stone. She had lost not only her child, but the future she had once dreamed of. A future filled with family, stability, and love. The curse, the betrayal, the emptiness, it all closed in on her, leaving her in a silence so deep it felt endless. As she lay there, alone in her grief, she realized that Chidi was gone. He had abandoned her, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life that now seemed shattered beyond repair. After several days in the hospital, Anwulika was visited by Mama Chisom and a group of women from the market who had heard of her tragic loss. They brought food, blankets, and warm words, offering her comfort in her darkest time. After the others left, Mama Chisom stayed behind, holding Anwulika's hand, and in a quiet voice, she offered advice that had been on her mind for a long time. "Anwulika," she said, "I've watched you suffer for years, and I don't believe all this misfortune is by chance. There is a weight on your spirit, a shadow that keeps dragging you back every time you try to move forward. Perhaps it is time to seek help beyond what we can see. There is a spiritualist, someone I trust. Maybe he can help cleanse you of this burden." At first, Anwulika hesitated. She'd always feared that the gods hadn't forgiven her for what she had done to Ujunwa, her childhood friend. But in the depths of her grief, she realized she had nothing left to lose. After she regained her strength, she agreed to Mama Chisom's suggestion, clinging to a small sliver of hope that maybe, somehow, she could finally be free. The journey to the spiritualist was somber. When they arrived, he listened intently as she poured out her past, her guilt, and her regrets. The spiritualist nodded knowingly and told her what she feared, that her betrayals and the curse that had followed were bound together, leaving her life in ruin. The only way forward, he said, was to appease both the gods and the spirit of her late friend. With humility and repentance, Anwulika followed each instruction carefully, performing sacrifices, reciting prayers, and making amends in every way she could. Each act of repentance lifted a bit of the weight from her soul. She gave offerings in Ujunwa's memory, spoke her regrets aloud, and let her sorrow be known to the gods. As Anwulika returned to the village, she found support in Mama Chisom, who even stood as her guarantor for a loan, helping her restart her business from scratch. For the first time, Anwulika carried something new within her, not guilt, but a quiet resolve, a commitment to live with integrity and humility. She spent her remaining years in solitude, choosing to live a simple life as an old woman, pouring her energy into her fabric stall and teaching young girls who came to her for guidance. Over time, she became a familiar figure in Kolu village, known for her wisdom and her stories. She would gather children and young women, telling them tales of her life, her mistakes, and the lessons she had learned. And though she lived the rest of her life alone, Anwulika's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder to younger generations of the dangers of jealousy, the weight of guilt, and the importance of repentance. In her old age, she found peace, not in love or riches, but in knowing that she had finally broken the curse, not only for herself, but for all those who would learn from her life. I have more morally filled stories to tell you, each one carrying its own message of hope, growth, and inspiration. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe so you won't miss the next one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell because I want you to be the first to hear the next chapter. Your likes and support inspire me to continue sharing these stories, and I can't wait to bring you even more. Thank you for being part of this journey.